Okay, let's begin. So, welcome to HackMerced's GitKraken presentation. My name is Truman, and I am a fourth year CSE major.
Hi, and my name is Lorenzo, and I am a third year CSE major.
We will be introducing you to what is GitKraken and how you can use it to collaborate in a team. If at any time you have a question, you can type your question in the chat and we'll answer it, or you can ask your questions at the very end. This is not a workshop, so you don't need to do anything, and we'll provide the link to these slides after the presentation. So this is the overview of the entire presentation. I'll introduce Git, GitHub, GitKraken, and how all of these relate to each other. And then Lorenzo will guide you through navigating GitKraken and what each button does. And then I'll show you how to use GitKraken. So what is Git? Git is a version control system that tracks changes in files. How it works is first you create a repository, which is pretty much a folder for your project. And then you would work on your project while making commits. Commits are checkpoints of your project. And these checkpoints allow you to return to a previous state of your project and revert changes in case you mess up. Git basically records the history of a project and lets you see everything that was changed. Git does all of this through a user inputting Git commands through a terminal. So in the right photo, you can see there are examples of Git commands. So for example, the git init command creates a new local repository. So on the left photo, which is a photo of a terminal, this user used the git command git init, and you can see that it did initialize a empty Git repository. What is GitHub? So GitHub is a code hosting platform for version control and collaboration between multiple users. Think of GitHub as a virtual space you can store your coding projects on the cloud. Other examples like GitHub include Microsoft OneDrive and iPhone's cloud storage iCloud. HackMerced uses GitHub to organize their workflow between multiple members working all at the same time. And GitKraken? GitKraken is a free Git GUI client that simplifies the use of Git. The client is easy to understand because instead of typing lines of Git commands into a terminal, GitKraken visually shows you your changes. And you do not need to memorize or look up Git commands anymore because GitKraken's buttons execute exactly what would be the equivalent of inputting Git commands in a terminal. You can use GitKraken with your team to easily keep a history of what has been done so far and to all work on different tasks at the same time. This is the previous slide's photo enlarged, showing GitKraken's user interface. So compared to typing commands in a terminal where everything you see is just black and white colored, in GitKraken you can see who made a commit. So over here you can see who made a commit and at what time they made the commit, what the commit is, and what branch you are currently working on. So if you click on the function components commit, and then you click on the modified file, you will see exactly what lines of code that were deleted, which are the red lines, and the lines of codes that were added, which are the green lines. And this is really helpful.
Well, while we can see what uses GitKraken has in terms of a client and its benefits over using a terminal per se, we will now be looking into how to use and navigate GitKraken. So when you open up GitKraken and you want to initialize or either open up a repo, clone a repo, or start a repo, this is the main page that it takes you. Now, what exactly is a repo? Well, repo is short for repository, and a repository is a folder system that stores all the files for a code base. And with that, we're able to actually see all of the different components of the repository. So looking at the three top left buttons, next please. Well, next slide, please. Yeah, so looking at the top three buttons, we have open repo, clone repo, and start a local repo. To open a repo implies you've already have an established directory where you can find your repository. And then on the command line, it'd be like CD and then whatever that directory would be. To clone a repo, you would either need, the URL of the repo that you're trying to clone, and you would also need a directory where you are going to clone the repo. And the last one is to start a local repo, you just need the name of the repository you're making and the directory. And that would be, in the terminal, it'd be git init. So another section that we could see is the recent repos, and this is very intuitive just because let's say there's multiple repos you've been working with, you can always access the most recent ones so you don't have to go looking or searching in File Manager to actually see where these repos are at. And it's just easy to find the most recent ones you worked on. Now, here's some additional information that's not necessarily relevant to what you can do with repos, but you could do scheduling. So with GitKraken boards, there's two types of buttons, one to open up a template for a board, and then the other is to create a board. And these are really, really cool to use when you have Trello linked or even a CSV file that stores all your schedule. So that's really useful for when you want to work with a team on a repo and maybe there's some deadline that you want, then you have the board to determine those tasks and the deadlines for those tasks. All right, so let's say you opened up a repo or you cloned a repo or you even made your own repo. What happens when you open it up? Well, once you open it up, your screen should look somewhat like this. As you can see, we have three main panes and then a navigation bar at the top. All right, so looking at the far left side, we can see there's two distinctions between the types of branches. Now, a branch is just a way of distinguishing from the original code, the master branch. And these branches are what allow us to write code outside of the master branch and to make changes such that once we know those changes work and they help with the code, then we can merge them back into the master branch. So what we end up with is two types of branches. There's remote branches that are branches in GitHub for this repository. And these branches are mainly all the different version types, or they could be feature types that every user in the team would be working on. And then you have also your local branches. Now, local branches just means that they're branches stored in your computer. And sometimes when you have to work on a certain feature or a certain version, you would just click on the remote branch and it would actually it would import it into your local computer so you can work on it separately. All right, so in the center of that screen, we have two separations here. We have all of the branches that come off of the main branch that you can see here, the master branch. And this just determines what versions have branched out, and every single dot that you see that extends from the main line, which is the master branch, those are iterations of the branch that they're writing. So essentially, each one of those iterations is a commit, and those commits um, are ways of knowing what type of changes were made. The way you distinguish a commit and with those iterations is through the right-hand side. And the right-hand side is what shows those commit messages. So those commit messages are written descriptions of the changes that are made every time there's a commit on a branch. All right, so on the far right panel, just opening the screen on the far right panel, you will typically see if you click on one of the commits, you would see a more detailed log of the commit, and it just shows who authored the commit, who committed, and as well as what changes were made to what file. Now on the very top is that navigation bar, and there's multiple functionalities on top, but these are typically used to mess with branches and to ensure changes are solidified. So we got the first button, which is a pull. And what a pull does is if you're behind a change or multiple changes on a branch that someone else wrote per se, then you are able to pull those changes to that branch and get all the changes that the other user that made the changes had pushed. And that's where we get into what a push is. A push is having changes you've made to a branch, and you're ahead of the branch with changes, and therefore you want to push your changes so that everyone else is able to get those changes and pull them inversely. Um, Now to branch is just to make those separate changes from the same code elsewhere, as mentioned. Now there's some times where you'd be working on a branch and you have to prioritize another branch as a result, but you're not sure if your code works to the fullest extent, so you don't want to commit the code. What you can do is save the changes of your repository, or sorry, your branch, and that is called stashing. And there's times as well where you're not sure that your code is stable enough to even want to keep, so you could do a pop next.
Okay, now that you know GitKraken's client, we will use GitKraken. So step one, you want to download Git to your computer. Otherwise, you can't input. You can't. Your Git commands won't work in your terminal unless you download Git. Step two, you want to download GitKraken. And step three, you want to boot up GitKraken and sign in with your GitHub. All right, now you can start with your HackMerced 6 project. I'll be going over two parts. The first part is how to create a brand new repository. And the second part is how to work on a existing repo. So for the first part, step one, you want to boot up your code editor, and then you want to initialize a new repository. So for me, I use Visual Studio Code. I would boot that up. And then on the top of VS Code, I would need to click on terminal, and then there would be an option for new terminal. And the new terminal would just boot up my terminal window at the very bottom. And then I would input the git command mkdir space and then put a name. That command pretty much just makes a new directory. And so after hitting enter, you want to change your directory into that new directory. So cd repo name, hit enter, and then now we are in the new directory. And so now we input git init to create a brand new repository. And this is what it would look like. It would say initialize empty git repository in, and it would say what it would say where it's located. So the red arrow points to the repository I just initialized. So step 2, you want to boot up GitKraken. So I would click on open a repo. It would open up this window. So I would click on open a repository and then select the folder I initialized. GitKraken will ask you if GitKraken can make a initial commit for you. And in that case, just click yes. So that is why we have a initial commit here. For the step, you want to click on push because as you can see on the left-hand side, we have a master branch under local, but no master branch under remote. So what that means is this repository does not exist on GitHub. And so in order to upload this repository onto GitHub, you have to push. And so if we click on push, then this prompt would come up saying there is no remote to push to, and you just want to click yes. Now that you have pushed to GitHub, you can now begin working. So open up your VS Code again, and then for an example, in the README file on the fourth line, I put the words blah blah. And so if we go back to GitKraken, then you will see that GitKraken automatically detected the change in the repository. And so in the center, you will see there is a work in progress node. If you click on the work in progress node, then on the right-hand side, it will say the modified file was the README file. And you want to then click on stage all changes, input a summary and a description for your commit, and then click on commit. Then if your teammates want to see any updated code, then you would then have to push. So are there any questions so far? Because we just concluded the first part. Questions? Okay, I'll keep going then. So now this is the part where you would work on an existing repository that is uploaded on GitHub. So step 1, you have to be a collaborator to the repository. So if you are a host that created the repository, then you need to go back to your GitHub and then click on your repository. Then you would click on settings, click on manage access, and then invite your teammates as collaborators. Step 2, then if you are the collaborator, then you need to boot up GitKraken, then click on clone a repo, click on github.com, and then choose the repository you want to clone. For this example, we will clone the HackMerced repository, and we will click clone the repo to finalize. Now you can begin working on your repository with your team. You want to occasionally, so when you want to go and work on your code, so back in your code editor, and then occasionally come back to GitKraken to stage your changes and commit and push if you need it. So that concludes the entire GitKraken presentation. Thanks for listening and attending. If you have any questions, we can answer it. You can just type it out in the chat.